Hello folks and welcome to the design argument, one of the most interesting and probably the most popular argument for the existence of God. The version we're going to look at was made popular by William Paley in the 18th century. Paley asks us to think about complex objects. That's an object that's made up of lots of parts which work together to make the object fulfill some function. And the example he used was a watch. Imagine a Stone Age person living on some island in the South Pacific, comes on the beach one day and finds a watch on the shore. Maybe an explorer's left it behind by accident. Even though he's never seen a watch before, the Stone Age man can open that up and look inside and say, somebody planned this, somebody made this. Look at the springs, look at all the different parts that work together to make the hands move. This could not have happened by accident. This must be the result of a plan. So complex objects are evidence of design. Paley didn't focus on some other things which I think he should have. There are certain processes and events which to me are also evidence of design. So think of a musical piece. Lots of notes organised, lots of sounds organised to make really beautiful sounds and rhythms. Or think of a dance, lots of different movements combined to create something visually interesting. Or how we use language, we combine words to make patterns and poems and songs. Put all those together, you can have a musical. Lots of parts make an interesting whole, and that's evidence of design. And the reason it's evidence for design is because it's easier to get chaos than it is to get order. Imagine you shook a Lego bucket and poured it out on the floor. You would just get a mess. But if somebody shook a Lego bucket and poured it and out came this beautiful picture or a really interesting artwork, you would say, well, that was pre-planned. There must have been some design going into that. If you walked into a room and seen a Lego statue, even a Lego statue with a little bit of mess attached to it, you would say there was a designer involved. So complex objects which are made of numerous interacting parts are good evidence of a designer. Well, Paley then went on to say, well, look at animals. They're complex objects made of numerous interacting parts. In a shark, the fins and the gills and the eyes and the teeth work together to make it a hunter. You can look inside the animal, look at the brain, the heart. All the organs are complex objects. The cells are incredibly complex. The things that make up the organs, they are as complex as any city. Even the parts of the cell are extraordinarily complicated machines. And so animals certainly seem to be complex objects which are made up of numerous interacting parts. And therefore they suggest a designer. Those things are more likely to come about when there's a designer involved. And who could have designed the universe? Who could have designed the living world? Only God. And there's Paley's argument for a designer. But hold on, some people object. What about the theory of evolution? What about Charles Darwin? Didn't he show us how complex animals could come about in an unguided process? Simply by having animals which inherit characteristics with slight variation from their parents. Can't we get complex animals without a designer? Some people in the 19th century and the 20th century thought, yeah, Darwin really got rid of the design argument. But I'm really not so sure about that at all, nor are many others. You see, evolution can only work in very, very specific conditions. You need the right chemicals, the right sort of planets, and the right sort of solar systems with the right sort of galaxies and the right sort of universe with the right physical laws. Otherwise, no evolution. The universe needs to be set up for life and for things to evolve. So without some sort of shaping force behind it, how could we even get evolution off the ground? And evolution could have turned out very differently. If in the past a meteorite had hit the wrong rocky pool, perhaps the history of animal life could have turned out to be very differently. Evolution explains the history of life from the first cells right the way up to you. But if things had gone differently, maybe we would only have had a planet full of some interesting germs or fungus. Yet this complex chain of events brought us all the way from the first cells up to you. And that seems to be evidence of a designer. So I'm not sure that the theory of evolution does get rid of a designer. But hold on, says the philosopher David Hume, who for some reason always seems to be pictured in something like a shark cap. David Hume said, well, who designed God? And wouldn't a perfect God make a perfect designed world, a perfectly designed creation? And those were his two objections. Long before Charles Darwin, he was saying the design argument didn't work. Well, who designed God? Well, according to the design argument we're looking at, God did not need a designer. God made the physical world. God isn't made up of little physical parts. He isn't made up of cells or molecules or chemicals or elements or anything like that. He doesn't need a designer, according to this design argument. And designers quite often leave a little bit of messiness in their designs. So, for example, in a rock concert, the rock artists will miss notes or hit the guitar hard. It won't be as perfect as a classical orchestra performing a piece, but it can be much more interesting and much more fun. Or think about some artists, they use wild brush strokes. They don't really carefully reconstruct what they're viewing, but the artist to the right seems to produce something just as beautiful as interesting as the artist to the left. Imperfections can be interesting. And sometimes in modern art, we can't even work out exactly what it is the artist is aiming at. But we can still know that it could not have happened by chance. Things have been arranged here to be at least visually interesting. Can we predict that any artist would make something like this? Probably not. Do we know what the artist's purpose was? Very rarely. But it does seem to be evidence of a designer, even when you can't quite work out what the messiness in the picture is about. And it's the same for the living world. We've had a complex chain of events throughout the history of life which has brought about this beautifully complex world with all sorts of interesting and wonderful creatures. And so it seems to me that we have animal life full of complex animals made up of numerous interacting parts, and that seems to be evidence of a designer because it's unlikely to have come about by chance. When we see complex objects made of numerous interacting parts, well, we know those things are much more likely to come about by planning and design than by accident. And the living world has come about, even if evolution was involved. It couldn't have come about by accident because so many things have to be just right for evolution to take place and for evolution to take the right path to get from the goo to the zoo to you. In other words, to get from the first cells all the way up to human beings with our marvellously complex brains. And therefore, it seems to me that animals are, like Paley said, very good evidence for a designer. And the objections to the design argument, that a designer would always make a perfect creation if he could, or that the designer needs a designer himself, aren't true. God is not made of numerous interacting parts, therefore he does not need a designer according to this argument. And secondly, we quite often don't know exactly what a designer is going to do, particularly artists. We don't know what they're going to do next, and quite often they put a little bit of messiness and chaos in their artwork. So therefore, if there is a little bit of imperfection in God's creation, that does not necessarily mean that God didn't design it. God could have had reasons for putting those little imperfections in there. And that's the design argument, Paley's design argument for God's existence, which to me seems as strong today as it was when Paley first offered it.